All right. Happy Friday evening. Trying to figure out if I'm on or not. Let's see. There we go. All right. Happy Friday evening. So tonight we are going to go over a couple of apps that I did. One, going over the. Uh, oops. I'll leave the site. One is talking about just a little app that I made about um, gathering information from potential clients, and then one is gathering information uh, from potential mentees, uh, and both of them connect to OpenAI, and I'm using OpenAI to either for the new clients to just do some discovery questions based on their answers to the initial form, and then for the potential mentees I am creating a quiz dynamically based on the answers that they provide for kind of their skill level in various areas for data engineering. So then I take that and I'm sending that via a JSON payload into a Azure ADLS container, and then from there picking that up and via a ADF pipeline, actually a Synapse pipeline, and pushing that data into uh, into Azure SQL Server tables. So super excited to share that with you all tonight, and the Python code behind that. As always, if you have any questions, feel free to stop me. Let me know in the chat. Let me know in the chat. Say hello that you're here and where you're from. And without any further ado, we will get started. Let me just pull up the apps here. We'll get moving. Let's see. Bear with me just a minute here while I pull it up. Should have had it all set up beforehand, but had some other things going on. So continue signing. Apologize for the wait here. Continue. I didn't have to do all this to sign in the other night, so apologize. So while we're waiting for me to get signed into Streamlit here, while I'm waiting for my code, if anybody has any questions about anything, let me know in the chat. Again, the things that we're using tonight are Azure, kind of for the cloud resource, and then an Azure SQL Server for the database, Synapse for the pipeline, Streamlit, and the OpenAI library, Python library, to hit OpenAI. And try and get logged into Streamlit and having issues this evening. There it is. 392. There goes. Okay. Finally logged in. Thank you for your patience. And I'm going to share my screen. I'm going to share. So one thing about Streamlit is that sometimes you get in and you have to wake your app back up. And that's because I'm not paying for any type of hosting or anything like that. And so it goes to sleep sometimes. And so you have to wake it up, which is fine for as often as I use this. So it takes a moment. As you see, now it's running. Here's the mentee skill assessment and quiz. And I showed this a little bit at the end of the episode last week, just briefly. Again, this is the skill assessment and quiz. You have your name, put in your email address, explain why you are looking for a mentor, any short-term goals, long-term goals, how you like to receive feedback, what your passions are, expectations and logistics. Just going to throw some answers in here real quick. We can select these. These are your scores for your ratings, database management, visualization tools, so on and so forth. Go down through there and you'll fill that out. Questions or concerns, say no. Yes, let's proceed. And at the end of it, it'll tell you that you've submitted your assessment and it's generating the quiz. It takes about 5-10 seconds to generate the quiz. Not too long. Again, what this is doing is it's going out, taking your responses from here, sending that to OpenAI, and then returning some quiz questions based on your answers to your self-assessment. So it's going to ask you some questions. What does group by statement do in Excel? And you could answer that. Obviously, it doesn't delete data. It doesn't update values. We're going to say group rows that have the same values and specified columns. In Python, how do you create a function? And it's going to be using the def keyword. For those of you that don't know this, I have a whole video on creating the functions in Python. The main purpose of data warehouse, explain this. It's not going to be to store raw unprocessed data. That would be like a ADLS or S3 bucket to act as a backup for data. No. Analyze and report data or to transport data. So we're going to say to analyze and report data, I think is what it's looking for there. Is Hadoop mainly used for? What is Hadoop mainly used for? And we're going to say big data processing, main advantage of cloud computing. We're going to say scalability, the role of database management. So it has several questions, right? Power BI, visualization, purpose of version control, keep track of changes, main objective for maintaining data quality, accurate and reliable, and what is an API in the context of web services, set of rules for how software components should interact. Sounds good. So submit quiz, got scored 10 out of 10, and then it's going to push that via a JSON file into Azure Data Lake, which is going to show up over here in this container. We could go to the storage browser, empty responses, and we will see one for 4.4. And there it is. So it's pretty quick. All right. So I don't know if it went to my, yeah, it didn't. So let's roll back to Streamlit. And so we see a feedback summary, which is really cool. Again, once you hit submit quiz, it sends your quiz responses back to OpenAI, and then OpenAI provides you a kind of a feedback on how you did on your quiz. And it'll let you know that the follow-up email was sent, and it was, and that is it. So the cool thing here is we're going to hit the little pencil button, and I'll walk you through the code that I used to create this app, right? Again, for any of you that are on, let me know, say hello. Let me know that you're here. Excited to have you here with me tonight. And if you have any questions, let me know. Getting ready to just walk through the code behind. Oh, I'm going to have to share my window instead of my screen. Window, share. Yeah, move Streamlit over here. So this window is just the ADLS container in Azure, but that's not where we're at right now. We are going to look at the code for the Streamlit app. So here's the code for the Streamlit app. Again, stop me if you have any questions, if you have any comments, suggestions, whatever the case may be. But I wanted to walk through the code behind the Streamlit app. So here we see that we have the Streamlit app, and we have, the code, the Python script. We have a handful of libraries that I'm importing. So I'll walk through what these are and and what I'm doing with them. Streamlit is kind of the visualization piece, right? Not visualization, but it's how the web page gets constructed. It creates the different entry forms, different entry pieces, and their associated titles. We have the JSON, right? So that's just taking the the data that is being populated in the form and creating a JSON object to push over to ADLS. We have date time, and that's just so that I could create a timestamp for right now. We have the OpenAI library, which is how I'm connecting to OpenAI to pass that data into really ChatGPT. OpenAI is the platform for ChatGPT. We have the blob service client, which again is how I'm pushing the data, that JSON object, into that Azure ADLS container. We have the SMTP library, which is the SMTP lib. So that's, again, to send the email. And then we have a mom text, and that's basically, again, another kind of wrapper for the email piece. So we have the OpenAI key. We have this Streamlit secrets.get, because Streamlit has its own kind of like similar to Secrets Manager or a Key Vault, where you could store your secure kind of keys and other credentials. And so again, this is my OpenAI key. It's going to get that to return that, and then it creates a client, which is just creating that kind of open port to OpenAI so that we could pass information back and forth to it, kind of like picking up a phone call, a telephone, and saying, hey, OpenAI, I've got a question. We have, we're just setting some states here. We have a session state for the score, and for that we're just setting to 0. We're getting the connection string and container name for the blob. Hey, Nikhil. Let me know if you have any questions. And then And then this is just, we talked a moment ago, real shortly during the demonstration of the quiz, that DEF is how you create functions in Python. And so this is creating a function to upload files to Azure, basically creating the connection to the blob service and the client, and then passing that JSON, again, this JSON object back into that blob client. Again, just pushing that JSON payload into that ADLS container. And then we are initializing the session state. So if the quiz started is not in st.session state, then it says session state.quiz started equals false. And we're doing that for started and submitted. Basically, just again, setting those session states so that it doesn't. Otherwise, what was happening was every time you clicked on that radio button to choose your answer or move that slider, the whole page was refreshing and everything was starting over. And so that's why you have to define session states so that you could use them to keep the page from refreshing until you're ready for it to refresh. Again, we have some configurations for the page. This is just setting a page title as data engineering mentee assessment, and we're centering that across the top of the screen. We have mentee skill assessment and quiz for the title. Can I make the code screen bigger? Let me see. Oh, you know what? I can change. There we go. Nobody really wants to see me, but what happens when I do this? Oh, that doesn't work. There we go. Hopefully that helps. Thanks for asking. Hopefully that makes it a little bit bigger for you. Sorry. Okay, so we have the title. We have it says, let's assess your skills. And just to flip back to what the app looks like, you see these things here, right? The mentee skill assessment and quiz. Section 1, self-reflection, let's assess your current skills and goals. So you see these things printed out on the page. So that's, again, we've got the title, we have st.write, just as written in regular text, kind of normal paragraph size text. And then we have a header size text for the sections. And then we have the text input. Text input are just these single line inputs, right? Not the big boxes, but the single line inputs. Then we have the multi-selects, are these drop downs where you could select multiple options. And we just say, why do you want a mentor? And then in an array, right? But in a list, in Python, we'd call it a list. Just square brackets with our options that we want to have in that multi-select. So we have several multi-selects. Then we have a select box with how do you prefer feedback, which is a little bit different than the multi-select. Multi-select allows people to add multiple options, where the select box, you only get to choose one option. So that's the difference between those two. You have a text area, which is different than the text input. These are the bigger boxes to allow people to do more like paragraph size feedback for your entry forms. And you could make these say anything, right? You're literally typing in here whatever you want it to say. So whatever type of form that you want to build, Streamlit provides this library, this Python library, and this platform where you could very easily create very custom forms depending on what information you want to gather. So those are multi-select, select boxes, text area. When we get down into the assessment area, I've chosen to use sliders. And so those are these sliders down here where you could kind of slide back and forth on a scale of 1 to 5, what your skill level is for each of these different categories. So those are the sliders. And again, 1, 5, 3. If we go through here and delete this and put the commas in here, we'll see. So we have the min value. We want to be 1. We have the max value. We want to be 5. And we want the default value to be 3. So that's what those numbers are. But you'll see kind of here, you could do steps. So you could change it to, instead of incrementing by 1, you change it to incrementing by 3, whatever the case may be. You could change the scale from 1 to 10 instead of 1 to 5, whatever you want that to look like. So those are all those. I wonder if I can. This. There I am. There we go. All right. So then we could see, again, we have the sliders, different categories. Showed you how to kind of give you an idea of how you could change your different scales. So those are sliders. Again, we talked about what the headers are. And you could see here where I'm assigning variable names, right? So for each individual response, I'm assigning that value that people are putting into that box to a variable. And I'm doing that so I could take that variable and create that JSON payload so that I could send it back to my ADLS container, right? And for like the technical skills, I'm gathering all that into one dict, right? One dictionary. And that's what the curly brackets are for. So we have the technical skills, soft skills, that are all being returned into one variable as a dictionary. And for those of you that don't know what the different data types are, different categories like that in Python, you go back and check out those Python tutorials, and I walk through that information there. Okay, so final considerations. Again, I give people a text area, select box for a couple of questions. So now we're getting into the meat of it here, right? We've got how we created the form with Streamlit. Now we're going to get into the OpenAI piece. So this is going to be the AI piece here. We are, we have the button. This is kind of the last of the Streamlit things. We have the button and the success, the response letting the user know that, hey, it was submitted. We're generating your quiz. And what this is combining that skill summary, right? This is coalescing basically the skill summary. This is aggregating all the data from the skill summary. So all the responses for the technical skills and joining it all together, right? So the /n is just the normal nomenclature in programming for a line code, for a hard line break. And then we're doing a join, the .join. And again, this is just collating all that data into one variable, because we're using that in the prompt, right? Then I'm constructing the prompt for ChatGPT for just for usability here for OpenAI. And I'm telling OpenAI, you're a professional technical mentor based on the following self-rated skills. Generate 10 quiz questions, right? Focus on data engineering topics like SQL, Python, ETL, blah, 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 blah. And then I want it to return that data in a JSON format. So I give it a very specific, it's important to be as specific and detailed as you can with ChatGPT or with OpenAI, with any AI. The more detailed you are, the better the response that you're going to get. And so I'm letting it know I want this very detailed format to be how it returns that data back to me. So question, choices, answer. And then I pass it, okay, here are the skills, and this is the skill summary. And so dynamically, depending on how you rank yourself, it's going to create 10 multiple choice quiz questions. And here is where it's sending it to ChatGPT. So client.chat.completions.create is kind of the function for sending that prompt. The model we're using is ChatGPT 4. And we could change this to 4.5 or whichever model we want to use. We'll leave it at 4 because 4 is the cheaper, less expensive model, not cheaper. But then we're saying we're role as the user. For these types of contexts, that's how you want the role. And then for the content, then we're feeding the prompt in that was created up here in this variable. And temperature is kind of like how accurate you want, how detailed and accurate you want the response to be. Usually 0.5 is kind of the standard. And then this is the project prompt. Part of this return also gives me a suggested project for the mentee, and that's something that it sends me via that JSON payload. So this walks through and goes back and uses the Streamlit library again, creating the questions and setting the session state for whether or not the quiz was started. Creates the session state for whether or not the project was created, and creates that that response. Puts that response into a JSON payload. If the session state quiz started is true, then it's going to say your personalized skill quiz. It's going to set the score initially to 0 and then create a empty list for the user answers. And then it's going to go through and enumerate through all of the questions that ChatGPT gave it back via that JSON payload and visually create those questions on the screen. So it just loops through that JSON payload that gets returned. And then, it evaluates your answers. And then at the end, it creates this button for the submit quiz, and then it scores the quiz based on whether or not you selected the right answer or not. And then it goes back and takes your answers and sends it back to ChatGPT and lets it know, okay, this is your quiz score. These are the questions and your answers, and it returns back that feedback summary, right? And so that gets assigned in the summary response. Again, we're using that chat.completions.create to submit that summary prompt that gets created right here. And then we return back the feedback summary and display it on the screen in Streamlit. And then this is just the project prompt, very similarly doing something very, very similar. We're passing the technical skills, we're passing your passions based on how you fill out the form, and then ask it to provide the data back in this JSON format. So then we have this result, and this result is basically everything that gets put into the form. So all of your answers to the questions, all of your quiz information, your score, that feedback response, and that project suggestion. So all the communication back and forth with ChatGPT, all of your information that you put into the form gets created in the, gets assigned via variables into this result variable. Again, in a very JSON format, right? The curly brackets and the kind of the key value pairs, right? The categories with the variables, with the assigned variables. And then it creates a file, basically your name and the date and time, and .json. And then it uses that function that we talked about at the beginning of the Python script to pass that back into the ADLS container. And then from there, it lets you know that the results have been saved to the cloud, and gives you your feedback summary. And then it also sends you a follow-up email with, hey, here's your data engineering assessment results, and here's a Calendarly link to set up an appointment with me, with Chris. And that's pretty much that. Nothing too exciting there. But if anybody has any questions, feel free to put them in the chat. Anything that you want me to go back over, let me know. So that is really walking through step by step the Python script for the mentoring. Very similar. There's not. I'll go through the new client one real quick before we pop over to Azure to look at the data lake and look at how to create the pipeline. And it's not a whole lot different. It's very similar in function. It uses, again, Streamlit to create the various fields for people to, for the form, and then goes through and uses OpenAI to have a conversation back and forth a little bit, just for discovery, right? For the client side, it's asking things about what's your current data state and what are you looking to get out of data consulting. Yeah, you could absolutely fill in the form. If anybody is interested in filling in the form and playing with it, you can actually use these links, and they are live, and you can get to the links and fill out the forms. All right, so here's the new client intake and discovery, much shorter. Don't want to overwhelm new clients. So you put your name in there. This is one of my other email addresses. You just put in I'm just going to put in a company name, industry. You'll choose the industry that you're in, tech or healthcare. We'll choose healthcare for now. What's your top data related goals and problems, right? And so this is an important piece for this form, because based on this is what it's going to give to OpenAI to create the discovery questions, so that communication, that chat back and forth. I'm going to say looking to, I think I had some text that I was using. Here we go. Boom, boom. So I'm just saying we are looking to automate our reporting. Currently, we are exporting data from business objects, creating reporting, doing VLOOKUPs across multiple sheets from other sources, and we get from vendors. We want to start with one report and see if it helps. And then we could choose the services we're interested in, and we'll say dashboards, maybe cloud migration, data warehousing. And we're going to say submit and start discovery. So it says, thank you. We're going to ask you a couple more questions, and this returns a bit quicker. It's not looking for this list of quiz questions. OpenAI is able to kind of process that information a little bit quicker. And so it lets me know, hey, sounds great. To better assist you, provide some more details about the specific report you want, and key insights it provides. And this will help us identify the best automation strategy. Also, it'd be helpful to know what challenges, if any, you currently face with this report. I think I have a kind of response, because I asked these questions before, so it kind of gives the same responses. So I'm going to say we have a monthly reconciliation report. that compares our sales and finance numbers to ensure that nothing is missed, and we can pay commission appropriately. The data sources are business objects, various CSV files. We get an email from other vendors. And I'm not going to quite answer this whole question thoroughly, right? Because a user might not answer this whole question thoroughly. And it tells you you need to press Control and Enter to apply. So I'll press Control Enter. And then it asks a follow-up question. What specific data points are you comparing in your monthly reconciliation? Are there any particular challenges or pain points you currently face with this report? And you could say whatever here. It will only ask 2 questions, and I'd set it to 2 questions because, again, I don't want to overwhelm new clients with a bunch of questions from ChatGPT. I want to gather a little bit more information, then prompt them for a little bit more specific information than they might have initially given, and then get that all sent to me, and so that I could have that discovery session with them and be a little bit more so a little further prepared than maybe I would have been without any of the prompting. So we're going to just say no. And it's going to say, thanks for sharing. And your information was sent to Chris. And then it gives you a schedule now link that you could go to set up a schedule, set up an appointment with me to have that discovery session. So that's that. All right. So let's jump over to, we're going to jump right into Synapse here. And I'm going to show you how to create a pipeline based on this data. So a couple things that you kind of already need to know in Synapse is you need to have, you need to obviously spin up the resource. So you need to create the resource. It's very simple. It's not real difficult in Azure to create new resources. In general, they're definitely it gets more complex as you kind of move into it. But you could just say create a new resource, and it'll give you a handful of resources. But you could search for Synapse. Close that, and you'll see Azure Synapse Analytics. You could do Synapse Data Fabric if you have a Fabric account already set up. So you could spin up that. We're going to just say Azure Synapse Analytics. We're going to say create. And I'm going to go through a few steps. I'm going to fall short of actually hitting the review and create since I already have a resource spun up. So you'll choose your subscription. Sometimes you may have access to multiple subscriptions within a tenant. Oh, thank you. We'll be able to see that file here in a minute. So we have a wonderful test subject that has provided information. Okay, so subscription, resource group, these are kind of just groupings of different resources within your account. So this Gamble Data Dev, you could create, if you have a managed resource group, you could put that in here. I don't. You'll name your resource just for ease, we're just saying Gamble Synapse. Key thing to know here, can't have capital letters. It'll let you know. Can't have spaces, can't have underscores, can't have dashes. None of those things will work. You can have dashes, you just can't end or start with dashes. So then we'll choose the account name. Then we choose the ADLS container. So ADLS just stands for Azure Data Lake Storage. Gen 2 is just the newer version. There's a Gen 1 out there. Generally, you're not going to spin up a new Gen 1 account or resource. But ADLS, Azure Data Lake Storage, again, it's just your blob storage, just a container, a resource that holds files and different objects. We could choose our file system name. Um, so account name, file system name. Important thing to know here, you could create a ADLS that doesn't have a folder hierarchy. You have to have, in order for this to be tied in to your Synapse account, you have to have hierarchy turned on with that ADLS container. And that's something that I go over in the ADLS training that I have. So we could skip over to security. You could choose an authentication method. When you're in part of a business, when you're part of a corporation, you'll generally just have the Entra ID as your authentication. Entra ID is used to be called AD. It used to be AAD in Azure, right? Azure Authentication Directory. Authentication Directory. And then AD is the on-prem version. Here we're just going to use local and Entra, and you could create a SQL Server admin login and password. Because again, you have part of Synapse is having that connection to your ADLS, and also having a SQL Server. Both, you could have it serverless, you could have it dedicated, but having a SQL Server. And that's pretty much it. Once you fill out that part, this can get more complex. But if you have a managed virtual network, you could enable the managed virtual network and do all that. Generally, you're going to add tags for just who created it, why it's being created, maybe a project name, things like that. And then you'll do review and create, and then it's going to do some checks. It's going to let you know that it's $5 per terabyte, which is not bad, right? Storage in the cloud is super cheap. And then you'll hit create, and it'll create that resource. So not super difficult. Again, spinning up Azure resources are pretty easy for the most part, and not real difficult to spin up. And when I say spin up, that's a common programmer thing, right? You hear people say, "Oh, I'm going to spin up a Linux container." In AWS, you could spin up an EC2 instance, and spin up just basically means create or turn on, or yeah. So when I say spin up, that's what I mean. All right, so this is Synapse. You could connect to Power BI in here, connect to ADLS. You could connect to other databases. Here you see that we're connected to a SQL database. And again, we've got our mentoring mentee assessment in here, because I was just testing to make sure everything was connected earlier. We have our Azure Blob storage. We have some integration data sets. I'll tell you what a data set is here in a minute. We have, again, this is the GDE dev ADLS. This is the blob container. This is the ADLS that those JSON files are being loaded into. When we click on this, we could see, this is the nice thing about Synapse. This is what I like about Synapse, is that everything's all housed within this resource. Fabric is sold very much as that too. Fabric is sold, kind of is pitched to you as this is a great resource for kind of consolidating and having things all in one place, because it has things like Power BI. It has things like ADF, which is Azure Data Factory. It has things like your ADLS containers, your OneLake, you can now have SQL servers in Fabric. You could also do a lot of that in Synapse at a little bit of a lower cost. Again, you could tie in all of your blob storage. You could tie in your SQL server. You could even spin up new serverless SQL databases from within Synapse. Um, so it has a lot of things here. Here along the left-hand side, we could expand this and you'll see we have home, data, develop, integrate, monitor, and manage. Again, Synapse has a lot of robustness to it. You have data is again where we went to see the workspace. Workspace is where your SQL servers will be linked, is where your ADLS containers and your integration data sets will be. Develop, you could create notebooks. You create SQL scripts. You create notebooks, which are this is very similar to Databricks notebooks, which is you're creating Python scripts, and so we'll hit notebook, and it's kind of in this node fashion, similar to PyCharm, right? And so we could create multiple nodes within the notebook. We can convert these to markdown cells so that if you want to kind of document your notebook, you know, people use that for that, right? And right, so that's markdown. And usually you do that. And then here, normally this is just going to be Python. And you can run these cells individually. So again, that's how to create notebooks, but that's not really what we're going to go over tonight. But you create notebooks, you create SQL scripts. So if you want to write a SQL script, you'd write a SQL script against your ADLS container. About you could query directly. You could query Parquet files or CSVs or JSON data that's in your ADLS containers. You can, and so you could query that directly using SQL. You can query your SQL server, whether it's the serverless SQL server or a dedicated SQL server that you've linked in here. So a lot of robustness, a lot of kind of interconnectedness that you could do in Synapse, similar to Fabric. So we have integrate. Integrate is where your pipelines are. So I have one pipeline here that I created again just for a test to make sure that all my stuff was connected before the session tonight. We have our source, our sink, our mapping, and we'll walk through that here in a little bit. But this is where your pipelines are going to be. Monitor is kind of where your runs are going to be. Your runs of your pipelines, your runs of your notebooks, your SQL scripts, anything that you've processed in here, anything that you've written and then hit the play button to submit it, then we're going to see here. And we're going to see the result of that. We're going to see any logging information that may have occurred from that, whether there were any errors or whether there were any errors or whether it was successful, and how many, even down to how many records were passed, were successfully, moved, things like that. Again, we could see the activities, SQL, KQL, Spark applications, data flow, our pipeline runs, our trigger runs, integration runtimes. Integration runtimes are just how it, are basically how it connects to the different services, our linked connections. There's nothing in here for monitor. So manage. Now in manage, we have a lot of our resources, right? We have our SQL pools, which again, we'll have our I have a dedicated and a serverless, and you'll see that it's just DW100, which is the lowest one. It gets more expensive, but I put it on the lowest one just to not run up a big Azure bill. The built-in is the one that gets created when you spin up Synapse. You could create Apache Spark pools. So if you need to, if you have big data and you need the power of Spark to, to get behind what you're trying to run. So if you're creating those notebooks and you need to, create a Spark pool to run that notebook, which is what you'll have to do to run a notebook, you could create a Spark pool, some Data Explorer pools. So you create some pools here to explore your ADLS containers and navigate through those. Link services is the important piece, right? So here is where you're going to connect to your different resources. And I have a couple of videos really walking through in detail, step by step, how to create dynamic link services and dynamic data sets, and what link services and data sets are in Azure. So in ADF and Synapse, and it doesn't matter whether you find videos for ADF or Synapse, they're both the same as far as link services and data sets go. How you create them and where things are at in the platforms are really the same. So I'll let you go out and look at that. I won't run up your time here walking through all that. Things that I wanted to show you though are how incredibly easy it is to create a new pipeline. So we're going to hit plus, create a new pipeline. We're going to name it. We're just going to name it mentee test. Again, no spaces. You put in a description, and I would encourage you to put in descriptions when you're creating your pipelines. But the most used activity in pipelines is probably the copy data activity. So copy data, you type in copy, it's going to come up. It's click and drag. This is low code. This is, there's no Python required here. There's really no SQL required here. There's not even an understanding of like any type of DS required here. It's all click and drag and drop downs and very easy. I would encourage you, when you do create these nodes, to be descriptive about how you name it, because nobody wants to come in 6 months from now and go through 20 different copy data nodes tasks just to find the one that they're looking for the project that they're making a change to. So be descriptive in your names. Be as programmatic and programmer type mindset when you're creating these. And what I mean by that is try to be as dynamic as you can be in creating these, because again, you don't want to kind of muck things up with 100 different tasks when you could create a loop and just use variables to feed into that loop during each individual incremental run of that loop. So be descriptive in your name, add descriptions so that when people come back and look at it, then they know what's going on. You could change this timeout. I usually leave it at 12 seconds. It's usually more than sufficient. You could deactivate these. So if you're testing something and you want to deactivate a node, then you can. You could set a retry. So again, the great thing about pipelines is you can orchestrate from here too. You hear people talk about Airflow as your orchestration tool. People use Azure Synapse and ADF pipelines to orchestrate their ETL and ELT processes. You can run Databricks notebooks from pipelines. So if you have an environment where it's a mixture of Databricks and ADF or Synapse pipelines, then you can do that. And orchestrate everything from here. So, this is an alternative to using like an Airflow, right? You could do it from here. And I've also seen people use Databricks to orchestrate. So don't think that you're locked into Airflow for your only orchestration tool. Okay, so those are those options. Your source, we're going to select a source here. It's going to be our JSON blob. And I created this to be dynamic. And so when you select the JSON blob, you'll see that it automatically puts some default responses in here. And that's based on that data set that I selected. But you could change these to, if instead of looking at the mentee responses, I wanted to look at the new client responses, then I could change the container. The file name, again, it wants a file name for the data set, but you could choose wildcard file path and do asterisk.json, and it will pull all of the JSON objects in that container. And so you could filter by last modified, and I would encourage you to use this. You can pass in variables. So I would encourage you to create a table in your database that timestamps when the last time you accessed different things, when the last time a run of each of your pipelines had run, so that you could come back and use that as, okay, as the filter for the last modified since this start time, right? Since the last time this pipeline ran until you choose the end time is now, right? And you want to do that recursively. Recursively just means that any downstream files, any downstream folders that are in that container, it's going to go through all of those. So if you don't want that to occur, be sure to uncheck that recursively. Enable partition discovery, and so that's just going to identify if files were partitioned, then it's going to make sure that it discovers that. Max concurrent connections. So if you want it to run quicker, and maybe this is going looking at multiple different things, then you could run concurrent connections to make things run in parallel. All right. And then you could even preview the data, right? And so this is just going to show us the JSON payloads. So we could kind of see the JSON payloads that people have put in there, that for those quiz questions and all that stuff. For our sync, we'll choose Gamble Data Dedicated. We're going to choose the schema. I have to look and remember what my schema was. Mentoring, that makes sense. So my schema is going to be mentoring, and my table, we'll just use the same table, mentoring, mentee assessment. We're going to, we could do an insert, an upsert, or a stored procedure. So you could run a stored procedure, right? So if you have a stored procedure that you've created in using T-SQL in your SQL Server, then you could run a stored procedure. You could do an insert, which is just taking that data and pushing it into your table. Or you could do an upsert, which is like a merge statement. So for those of you that know what a merge statement is in SQL, then you could do the upsert. I have used AWS, and you could do similar actions in Glue, right, using S3 containers. So instead of using that Azure Blob Storage library in Python, you could use the Boto library, Boto 3 library, and for AWS, and push things directly into S3 containers, and then use Glue to grab the data from the S3 container and push it into like an RDS Postgres database, or you could use, push it into something like Redshift or something like that. So there's definitely options there for AWS. So if you do upsert, you have to choose the key columns, and you could choose that. There we go. So I had to refresh, but we could choose the columns, and we'll just choose timestamp. Timestamp's a pretty good one to use because in this case, timestamp's down to milliseconds. The chances are of two people submitting something with the same exact millisecond timestamp is incredibly rare, but so I'm going to use timestamp. For my case, if you're dealing with big data, probably don't want to use timestamp. You'll probably want to make sure that you're using the specific primary key for that table. Wow, so long. Sorry, man. There's a lot to this. So you choose to auto create the table. Thanks. Again, I'm incredibly sorry that it is taking so long to walk through all this. Okay, so this is the thing that I really want to get to tonight, the mapping piece of this, because Azure does such a great job, and Synapse does such a great job of identifying the different fields in that JSON structure and kind of flattening it for you, right? So here we see the timestamp field. We even have the groupings, right? This is the self-assessment grouping and all of the questions that were in that self-assessment kind of hierarchy of that JSON data. We have the technical skills. We have soft skills. We have these that are kind of like this are the single questions. So this is why mentor. This is short-term goals, long-term goals, mentor goal. These are kind of those array answers where people could have chosen multiple things. And then we have the quiz questions and answers, right? Then the score, the feedback summary, and the project suggestion. So you could go through all these and choose the appropriate field from your table, not name, email. And if there's any that you don't want to include, then you just uncheck this include box, and it won't include that in your transformation, in your loading of the data here. And you could bulk include or exclude, and then you could exclude all of them and then choose the ones that you want to include. But it's really, again, Synapse makes it super simple. And then once you do all that, again, I have one that's completed here, just like they do in baking. I've got this is what it looks like when it's all done. So we see that, again, this is that mapping with the column names. And I've excluded a bunch just so that I could kind of give you an example, but that's that. And then this is an important kind of cost attentiveness piece. That in your settings for your pipeline, you could choose what the maximum data integration unit is. So this is the DIUs. This is how Azure bills you for your compute. And you see that the copy duration is 25 cents per DIU hour. And so it's a quarter per DIU hour. So if you're using 4 DIUs, then it's $1 per hour that this runs. If it runs for 5 minutes, then cool. It's not a whole lot. If it runs for 5 hours, then you're using 4, then you've just spent $5, right? And if you have 100 pipelines out there and each of them ran for 5 hours, I hope not. If you have a pipeline that's running for 5 hours, you probably need to look at refactoring some of that. Or it's huge and it runs maybe overnight, and maybe it's your main pipeline that orchestrates everything that happens, right? But you change this. If you have 32 of these, right? You could imagine how quickly cost builds up depending on your integration units, your degree of parallelism. So again, if you choose 4, then this is running 32 DIUs times 4. And then you choose any fault tolerance. So you could skip incompatible rows, skip missing files. If you um, skip forbidden files, skip files with invalid names, things like that. And then if you want to enable logging, you can enable logging, and it'll basically take just a text file of the log and save it to an ADLS container. And that's that. So ton of different options. Again, the settings are more for just cost consciousness and speed, right? If you need something with a little more oomph, then you could change your data integration units. You'd leave it at auto. A lot of people I see leave it at auto. The problem's going to be, you may end up with a unexpected $100,000 Azure bill because all of your pipelines are set to auto, and you had some bad data get pushed in, and maybe you had some weird DDoS attack, and all of a sudden you got a million different records come in all at once, and your bill, it decides that, and Synapse decides it's going to scale way up and use a bunch of DIUs and that you don't want to use. So just some things to stay conscious of. Those are the big things. And so once you do all this, we're going to change this back to 4, change this back to 1. Just uncheck this and uncheck this. Once you do all this, again, we could choose the upsert, new time. We'll use timestamp. Once you do all this, you'd hit debug. So debug is kind of when you're testing. You could hit debug when you are when you have this in production. You're probably going to schedule it, right? You could create a schedule, add a trigger. You could trigger now, or you could do a new trigger. You could choose a new trigger. Your triggers are generally going to be your schedule, or you could do a storage event, right? So you could say when a file hits that ADLS container, then it triggers this pipeline to run, which is cool. Which is similar to how lambdas work in AWS. So you create an AWS Lambda function that goes through, and when something hits an S3 container or when a certain event happens, then it triggers code to run. Something failed. Probably because I was making some weird change. So this happens too, and you have to troubleshoot, right? Wonder if it's because, let's just insert this. Use existing. Anyways, play with this. So you hit debug, it'll run. It'll refresh itself every 5 seconds. So every 5 seconds, this is going to refresh, and it's going to change from queued to running to complete. And it'll either be an error, it'll either fail and have an error, and you'll troubleshoot it, or it will come back and say succeeded, like that. And your data is going to be in there. And so we see that it read 74 kilobytes, it wrote 59 kilobytes, read 13 files, wrote 13 records or rows, and it used 4 DIUs, 1 parallel copy, took 18 seconds. So a lot of kind of metadata here that you could find, and that's it. And then from there, you could go into, we'll go into our SQL Server, and we'll run this. And we see all of our different records. And that's that. So, and then from there, you connect it to, Power BI and create visualizations or however you want to do that. So, yeah, it's a fun project for me. I went ahead and tied it into my website so that people could use this for submitting the mentor assessment and for new clients, onboarding new clients, particularly because of the AI integration piece. Um, and I'll probably continue to kind of build out that AI integration piece as long as it doesn't cost too much. And we're gonna stop sharing. Um, oh, I'm not sharing my database. How do I stop sharing? There's me, not me. We'll just do this. So that was that. It was a fun project. It definitely let me know if you run into any roadblocks. I'm happy to kind of help you out if I can, and let me know how it goes for you. Let me know if you come across some other ways to do things, and would love to share back with the rest of the community, and would love to hear your experience with it too. Everything that I did tonight, obviously with the exception of the Azure stuff, is free. Streamlit is free. Um, Obviously, writing Python scripts is free. OpenAI is not free. There's some cost to that, but it's pretty small, especially for something like this. You're not passing a bunch of tokens back and forth. Um, you could probably put $5 in it, and it would probably last you a while. So, um, yeah. And then the Azure stuff, I think I've spent like $5 or $6 on the Azure stuff. It's not super expensive um, for a smaller project like this. But again, if anybody has any questions, let me know. But thank you, Nikhil, for joining me tonight. For those of you that are watching on the recorded session, let me know down in the comments if you have any questions, and I'll get back to you. But other than that, I'm going to let you all get back to it. I apologize for the longer session tonight. Definitely ran over a little bit, but thank you for joining me. Have a great week.